And again, so let's talk real quick. Again, I just finished the last video, perspective, voice, and narrative. But I talked about in that, I mentioned that I'd done one on world building and Mary Sue's. So, well, and I mentioned Mary Sue's. And I think this time, touch a little on world building and talk a little about a world Bible. We'll talk about a story Bible later, but a world Bible and world building. Um, it shouldn't be that complicated a concept. It's fairly, fairly wussywig. What you see is what you get. World building. You are building your world. Uh, so if you're doing a fantasy world, you have to worry about the mythology, the nations, the races, the nationalities, the way magic works, what happens when you die, who can use magic, how easy is magic to use, what languages there are, what kind of trade system they have set up, what laws they have set up. Is slavery a problem? Is slavery an issue? Is slavery okay? How do cultures interact with each other? Do you have, you know, a lot of shit. A lot of shit. And that's why a lot of fantasy writers kind of crib from ancient cultures and societies and kind of just create a melting pot where each nation is just basically an ancient society with one weird thing. Uh, Basically, there's samurai, but in the desert. That kind of thing. That wasn't anything specific, I don't think, but if it was, let me know. Um, but world building. So, like, if you're doing a modern day setting, what's modern day? What's the world building you have to do? It's now. Well, you have to explain vampire, whatever the fuck weird thing you're putting in, or whatever elements you're putting in that change things. If you're having a character who's a private eye and you're setting it in literally basically the real world, but you're having a murder that happens. Well, that's all story Bible shit, except the characters. He knows people. He has to know people. The murder victim has to know people, and that's what goes into your world Bible. Your story Bible is more for storylines. Like I said, we'll get to that. But your world Bible is more the people who exist in your world and the basic internal mythology of your world. And that brings us to the most important part to me of crafting a good world that's going to last. And that is consistent internal mythology. And that sounds like a really funky phrase. It sounds like it's going to be really confusing, but basically, once you set up your rules, they can't change without notification. It's like a lease that your readers agree to when they start reading the book. You're establishing your laws. As you establish your laws, as they read through your book, they get a more concrete understanding of the way this world works. When you change that, they have to take on faith that there's a way that happened. So if you're doing a noir style murder mystery and all of a sudden fucking Rabbi Lowe's golem shows up halfway through the fucking the third fucking act, well, now you've thrown everything out the window, and now you have to have the character figure out and have the character and consequently the reader walk through how this is possible. An internal consistent mythology should only be changed when you have an explanation to change it. And to have that explanation, you have to understand how your world works. Now, you can freeform it. You can freeform it really well, but once you freeform it, you have to look back through it and kind of make sure everything works the way everything works in a cohesive manner. You don't have to make a world Bible. You don't have to do any of this stuff. But you can literally world build with man walks in the desert and just follow the ink pen until you've created a universe as the story goes. But if you want to build a bit of background, if you want to have things you can fall back on, creating a world Bible is key, because it allows you to say create the interconnections between groups. It allows you to say, hey, this character, you know, create little tiny backstory notes. You don't have to fill in their entire backstory, but like use fantasy story. You know, you have your Nanok the Barbarian, uh, and he meets a princess, and that princess is kind of a bitch. I know, shocking, a Conan-inspired story where a princess is a bitch. I know you're in awe of my creativity, but you can make notes in your world Bible that maybe she's a bitch because she's pampered and she's never actually had to deal with any kind of stresses, or maybe she's a bitch because she's had to deal with a lot of stresses and learn to not trust anyone. They're both valid explanations for, or fuck, you can do all four. Uh, you know, it's however you want to do it. But like I said, a world Bible allows you to do things like have an explanation ready if someone asks you what happens or why this character's like that, or have quotes set up, or especially if you're planning a longer form story, when you get to chapter 7 and you don't know what to fucking do, you can have your world Bible to pull off of and find a character that you thought of using earlier that you never got around to, that you just left in the notations, and slip them on in with a story hook. However you want to use it. But that's the whole point. It's a resource that you can use. The other thing is if you're working with other people and say psst. Yeah, on a psst. But if you're working with other people on a larger project, a world Bible also can make sure everyone's on the same page, for lack of a better phrase. So, like if you're doing a series of videos that have a bit of fiction to them, a world Bible can give other people who are working on it at the same time in the creative section kind of an idea of the way this universe works and the laws that are confined in it, so you can also have a consistent eternal mythology. It's really kind of important as far as I'm concerned, because I'm going to give you an example of a time that internal mythology was inconsistent and it kind of damages something for me. I grew up with Mad Max. My brother absolutely fucking loved it. I was a little wee for the first movie, but my brother and my dad loved it, so I ended up seeing it when I was like 7 or 8. So Mad Max to Road Warrior to Beyond Thunderdome. I actually saw Beyond Thunderdome in the theaters. And then Fury Road. But when I saw Beyond Thunderdome in the theaters, I was still basically a kid. And so I watched Fury Road. And I have an issue now. What the fuck is the timeline? Seriously, I mean, like if you actually can explain the timeline, fucking let me the fuck know. I will spread that shit around. But in the first movie, it's been like just a few, maybe a handful to a dozen years since the crisis, and he's still carrying around a picture of his wife, and he still thinks of himself as a cop, so it can't have been that long. Second movie, okay, well, it's been a few years more, things like that. Third movie, he's getting white in the hair, and they're certain things where they encounter like a pilot, and the pilot remembers planes, but the kids kind of have mythologized it, and so okay. And then in Fury Road, he has a picture of his his family. He has a picture of his family, and I had a Polaroid, which means someone developed it, which means that's pre-war. But the old people they encounter in the desert, the old women they encounter in the desert, don't know how TV shows work. That bothers me, because that's inconsistent internal mythology for me. The timeline doesn't work. Now, if there's an explanation like Max is immortal, okay, how? No one else gets immortality, they get tumors. I had one theory suggest to me that Max isn't really Max. Max is a title that people pass along now, like Batman, or fucking Superman, or things like that. It's just a name people take when they want to be a badass. They take the name Max, but again, he still had the picture. But maybe it's a mantle that gets passed down, through the ages, kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, I guess, but why the fuck does he have the picture? And it's just that little thing. I know you're not supposed to think that hard about it, but the internal mythology is kind of one of the things I pay attention to because it's something I worry about. At the same token, I'm a stupidly big nerd about Egyptian mythology and ancient Egyptian culture. Have been since second grade. And I love The Mummy. Brendan Fraser's The Mummy. Absolutely love it. I hate The Mummy Returns. I hate, hate, hate The Scorpion King. But I love The Mummy. It is wrong in every goddamn aspect, but I fucking love it. It's hilarious because the world itself is consistent. You know, there are gods of good, there are gods of evil. This book does things, these words do things, but it all relates back to Egypt. Now, granted, they didn't have books like that, they did scrolls, but you know what? Again, you know, if I'm going to nitpick that, I'm going to nitpick why giving someone a curse makes them so powerful they can destroy the earth. You know, it's just those things. You know, you just let some things go. Uh, but that brings me to something else when it comes to world building is you need to find a place to start. Now, it's going to be different for every person. I can't tell you where to start, same as you can't tell me where to start. In the context of an urban fantasy or things like that, I look at the mythologies, the fantasies, the folklores I want to draw from. I've got one story idea I'm working on where I kind of draw from a couple different places, and one of them is the Voodoo and Laura, and the Lorax. Voodoo and the Lola, and the Geeds and things like that. And that idea, now not actually voodoo, but researching that and doing things related to that and how it would relate to other mythologies. It's one of my hobbies is like looking at mythologies and finding the parallels between them because I think it's fun. In a fantasy story, I tend to start with a base mythology, and then I create a vague outline of a world with regions, with like desert and jungle and things like that. And then I look at my base mythology and see how people would have developed their religion based on their ecology. My wife and I used to have long conversations when we first started hanging out about, because she was an ecology student, was a forestry ecology student, and we used to have discussions about the differences between Greek culture and Japanese culture. Well, polytheistic Greek culture and Japanese culture is basically Olympian gods and Norse gods and Shintoism and Egyptian and Sumerian, and how their different ecosystems actually fed into the way their religions developed and the way they kind of culturally changed and some of their cultural mores. It's something we still do from time to time when the mood hits us. And that's kind of where I start. So like desert societies, depending on the type of desert, you know, how they get their water, how they fertilize their land determines how they see their gods. Whereas a place like Greece, where you've got clean water in rivers everywhere and abundant food and trees, a bit more laissez-faire, a bit more relaxed religion structure until they start becoming expansionist. And all that's neither here nor there. I can do a whole other video if people really fucking want me to on shit like that. But that's where I start when it comes to fantasy. Is basically the same place I start in modern day. I just don't have to build the world in modern day. I know how we got here. I know where we are, and so now it's a matter of take those little elements from the past. What do the Mayan gods, the vampires, and the Loas all have in common? What do Egyptian culture and Hawaiian culture have in common? Things like that, and I can use those to kind of find little fun notes or little folk tales and folk legends and superstitions are fun. You know, if you're going to do angels and demons, honestly, I suggest actually looking into the Book of Black Magic by A.U. Waite, the Claviculus Solemnis. I can't remember the name of that one. The French writer who had the really good combination that I had years ago, but stuff like that, and seeing how they talk about religions, looking into the different hierarchies of hell as presented by different occultists, but looking into Elizabethan and later occultism and finding out how they cataloged hell and how they cataloged things like that. Getting a good dictionary of angels so you can find some really interesting angels. Like there's an archangel of lust. Who knew? Revoam. Uh, but that's basically that. And so finding where you want to start with your writing and where you want to start with your world and where you want your world to go is important, but not as, because if you're writing it well, the story will change. Uh, Nothing survives contact with anything. You can have the best thing planned out, outlined out, but the moment your characters start interacting and getting their own voices, they're gonna change and they're gonna go their own way because it makes more sense now that you understand this character, you have a better idea of them, and anything else would be different. And starting a story out from this character will always do this limits how well you can write them. Starting a story with starting a world with this is going to happen here and these people are going to do it because this, it limits how well you can write because now it's no longer a natural progression to that moment. It's now a moment that you've set in stone, and characters will change their characterization and change their behaviors to do it. And now you've got to justify that. And that's pretty much that, I think. But yeah, that's world building. And then World Bible is the booklet or file you use to catalog all that. Everything I was just talking about, when you put it into a form like a zip file or a folder on your desktop or a thumb drive or print it all up and put it in a notebook or handwrite it out in a composition book, that's your World Bible. That's it. That's it. Once you've the thing you use to compile your notes on your world, that's your World Bible. I mean, it's not a complicated concept, but it's a I'm going to be long-winded in explaining it, basically. That's why I wanted to give it its own video. And that's pretty much going to be that. So, have a good night.